Hi there, Winnebago owners. Today in your 2015 Winnebago Vista, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install SumoSprings on the front axle. And this is what our SumoSprings look like when they're installed. Now, we do currently still have our motorhome lifted up a little bit with the leveling jacks, just so we can show that it is a two-piece design here. You can see the upper piece and the lower piece. And it's important for our front suspension to have that full travel there available to it, because as you're trying to steer and hitting potholes and stuff, it's important for our front wheels to maintain contact with the road. So if it needs to separate, it needs to separate. So they've got a two-piece design there to allow the system to still function the way it needs to. But once we apply weight to it, or our motorhome starts to sway in one direction, our SumoSpring here can help to support some of that weight and to help also prevent sway. The SumoSprings here, they also act as dampeners, so whenever you hit like a pothole or something out on the road, instead of that force traveling through our suspension up into the cab, it's still going to do that some, but a lot of the forces are going to get absorbed in the dampener here, so we're going to feel less of those obstructions out on the road. The way they help to prevent sway some is because as your motorhome starts to rock back and forth, as it rocks, maybe we'll just say it's rocking here towards the passenger side, our frame then is going to get a little bit closer to the axle and we're going to compress the spring. Well, the spring here, the SumoSpring doesn't want to compress, it wants to remain in its normal state, so it's going to help push back as it's compressing and then also help push back to return it to where our normal stable upright position is. And it does this on both sides, so as you sway back and forth and it goes to compress that spring, it's always going to be pushing back to help try to bring you upright. If you have a very heavy motorhome too that's kind of working your suspension, bringing it close to the max, this can help support some of that weight so that way your suspension's not working as hard. Now, it doesn't increase the amount that you can carry in your motorhome, it's just an additional component to help ease your other suspension components in supporting all that weight. All right, so we're back here on our test course. Now, the first time that we drove this thing, we had some clunk noises and stuff, so we got it in the shop right away. And we ended up finding some loose bolts on the rear sway bar, which was leading to excessive sway and clunk noises. But we've gone ahead and done our upgrades as well, so it should feel even better now that we've repaired the issue it had and also added the upgrades on top of it. We're going to start here on our uneven bump section, which is going to simulate like hitting a pothole. And it feels pretty good. That first bump, I barely even feel it here in the steering wheel. A lot of times you hit these things and it jerks the wheel pretty good, but it's absorbing a lot of it pretty well. You can see it moving the wheel a little bit there. We do still got a little bit of sway, but we're not really swaying that far. You know, we got a little bit of rock going on. We can hear a couple of things bouncing back there, but we're staying fairly upright. So it definitely has made a difference over where we were at. I don't hear our clunk noise anymore, so that's good. We're heading into the even bump section now, and this is going to simulate like pulling in and out of your driveway or going over a speed bump. Now, it does feel like it's a little bit softer than it was before. Fixing the sway bar, and sway bars don't really affect when you're hitting things dead straight on, just your sway. But SumoSprings will help out in pretty much all situations, and we can definitely feel some dampening going on there. We're now going to head into the slalom section here, so we got to get around over there. And this is where we're going to mimic an evasive maneuver. And this is where I usually notice the biggest differences from our installation. Because before, when you hit into it and you get kind of a rock, we had that clunk going on before. But a lot of times going over the bumps, we're not really at a super high speed, so sometimes it's not real noticeable. But once we get out here and get some speed into it, it becomes real obvious the differences that have been made. So we're getting into there. We're going to get a little bit more speed going here. All right, we've come into our section now, so we'll start to get it rocking and see how she feels. And we do got some things that are kind of moving back there, but as far as the sway, we're staying fairly upright. This is still kind of a beast of a motorhome, but definitely has made some improvements over where we were. We're not swaying nearly as far. We still got some stuff bouncing around a little bit inside. For this customer here, I think I would recommend a set of rear Sumos to help dampen that out and smooth it out a little bit more. But as far as the evasive maneuver goes, it does feel like we're able to make a quick response without putting ourselves in danger here, even though some things are kind of moving around. it feels very responsive. You know, you got some things sliding on the dash, but as far as the driver, I don't feel like I'm being thrown around, so I feel very comfortable that I'd be able to maintain control of the vehicle in any of those kind of evasive maneuver situations. So that we've talked about some of the features of our SumoSprings, we're going to hit the test course to see how they feel, and we're going to get into the install as well. Now, as far as installation on these, they are fairly easy to install. You could probably do both sets in about an hour, and you'll need a few pieces of a few tools to get it done as well. You need like a 9/16 socket and a 13mm socket, maybe a wrench of those sizes, and you're good to go. So it's not a very involved installation process. We'll begin our installation here underneath the vehicle. The jounce bumper that's here we'll need to remove, but before you go ahead and remove this, I highly recommend go ahead and taking your leveling jacks here in the front and lifting up on the front of the vehicle some, because we're going to need an increased distance between the axle and the frame here to get our new spring in. And if you lift it now, you're going to have some more room to work, so you might as well do that now. Now, once you get it lifted, I do recommend putting jack stands underneath the frame, so that way we're not just trusting our hydraulics of our leveling system holding it up. We want to have some actual support underneath it as well. Once you're lifted up though, we'll go ahead and take this off. We're going to use a 13mm socket. Probably going to need an extension here. There's a bolt up inside of there that we're going to remove, and this is the passenger side. On the driver's side, we're going to be doing the same thing. The only small difference there is that on the passenger side here, the frame's covered up, so the nut is welded to the frame. On the driver's side over there, it'll be exposed, and you'll see the bolt where it goes through. The nut is not welded, so you will need a 15mm wrench to hold the nut on the opposite side. We are going to save this hardware though. We're going to reuse it to install our new components, so make sure you save it all. So you'll have that nut and bolt on the other side and just the bolt on this side. All right, once we get that zipped out of there, we're going to go ahead and take the bolt out. We're going to reuse that. You can set the jounce bumper aside. We won't need that anymore. This is our new bracket that we're going to install for our SumoSpring here. This is going to sit on the bottom of the frame just like this. You can see there's these little ears right there on each side. Those need to hook in on the inside of the frame just like that. We're going to take the bolt we just removed there, slide it up through the center, get it started into that weld nut there, or if you're doing it on the other side, make sure you start it into the other nut, hold them in there. Before you tighten it down though, we're going to spin it around just for a moment, because we have two bolts that we'll need to put in now. You're not going to be able to put them in once you tighten it down, so drop those in. And then you can spin that back around. And now we're going to tighten it up, and again, ensure that those ears are positioned on the frame correctly. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just hold it up there so I know I'm holding it in the appropriate position, and then I'll run it down. All right, now that we've got that snugged up, we're going to take the upper spring, and you can see you've got 4 holes in it here. We want the set that's further apart. So if you're holding it like this, you can see that those two are close together. And then if we turn it 90 degrees, you can see this set here is far apart. Those are the two that we're concerned with. They're going to line up with those bolts on the bottom. So we're going to thread those bolts into this upper half. I'm going to change positions here because this is a bit awkward from how I'm sitting, and then we're going to get those started in there. All right, so we repositioned ourselves a little bit. We can now easily hold those up. We're just lining them up with the bolts, and then we're going to start the bolts in the threads. Once we get them started, we'll use a 9/16 wrench to snug them down. There we go, we're started. If you have a ratcheting wrench, that works out really nice to tighten them down. It's a lot easier than just using your boxed end. But I will tell you, if you are going to use the ratcheting one, as you're tightening down one bolt, keep an eye on the other bolt, because as soon as that other bolt starts to raise up a little bit, that's when you want to switch to that other bolt and start tightening that side down, or else you're not going to be able to fit this larger mechanism for the ratcheting side in place there, as the clearances are pretty tight. So we can see there we got a small gap over on this side. The wrench just barely fits, but it still fits in there. So we'll switch to this side so we can get this side run down. And it's so loose right now, we're just gonna do it by hand until it gets a little tighter. Yeah, we're just gonna alternate back and forth like that until we get it tightened out. All right, now that we've got them snugged up, we can turn our attention to the bottom section. We are gonna have to do a little pre-assembly on it before we get it in place. So this is what we'll need for our pre-assembly. This is our lower bracket. This is the lower bumper. You can tell because it only has a single bolt. It also has the small nipple on it, whereas the other one was concave. And this is the same bolts as the two that we dropped down to thread into the top. You're gonna have one more for the lower one here. This is how this is gonna sit in the vehicle. So we're doing the passenger side. So this is the rear, that's the front. You can see there's two slots here. Those two slots are to attach your lower section. On this vehicle here, we want to use the inside slot, the one closest to the middle of the vehicle. So we're going to take our bolt, slide it through that slot, grab our SumoSpring and just thread it onto the bolt. Now we don't want it to be super tight because we do need to be able to adjust it forward and backward like that. So we're just running it down until it's snug, but to a point where we can still maneuver it. We can now roll back under there and put this in position. So here we're going to take our spring, we're going to set it right on top of the leaf spring stack. These are the two U-bolts, so it's going to straddle those. At the front here, you've got these little ears here at the front, one there and one there. Those are going to sit on each side of the leaf spring, and we're going to butt it up right against this top small plate, so that not the angled one, we're going to sit on top the angled, but be against the other one. So just like that. That way you can't push it back any further because this lip here is touching the plate there, and you can see it straddling on each side. Once you've got it set in place there, we can drop our bolts down through. You're going to have 4 carriage bolts, 2 long and 2 short. The long ones are for the front, and there are 4 square holes in the plate. We're going to drop them right down through those square holes. So these are the long ones we're putting here in the front, and then here's the short ones. Those go in the back. Once you've got those dropped down, we're going to put our straps on. So that's what these look like here. They're going to slide up over our carriage bolts. So you have one for the front, one for the back. You can see it's got a small relief cut in it there. That is just if you need it. If you're having a difficult time installing it one way, with it being flat, if there's some kind of obstruction, you can maneuver it around as necessary to get a little bit better clearance. And you can install this either way. We can install it like this, or we could install it like this. Now, the preferred way is to put it up like this, with these touching the bottom of the leaf spring, but in some instances your carriage bolts won't be long enough to have enough threads to put the nut on it, and in that case it's okay to flip it over this way. That way this surface touches and you're going to get a little bit more threads poking through to be able to install your nut. We already know, I've tested it. It will work fine this way, so that's how we're going to install it here. So this is just going to slide up the bottom, and then we've got locking nuts that we're going to put on the carriage bolts to hold it in place. So when you go to install your strap, you're probably going to have to pull the bolts out just a little bit to get it to clear. That's pretty normal to have to kind of maneuver it a certain way because there's so many components right here and it's so tight. Once we get both the bolts to drop down through there, and you could see it was a little tight on the one side. I did have to flip it around a couple of times till I found the sweet spot where it slid up there. And we'll just start our nuts on bottom here. Sometimes you'll want to hold the carriage bolt down if it wants to push up. There we go, got that one started. We'll get the other one started here. Once we get these started, we're going to go to the rear set of carriage bolts, and we're going to get the strap started on that side. Now I'm going to use a 9/16 socket to run down our hardware. When you go to tighten them down, you're likely going to want to hold the carriage bolt down, because as long as you're keeping some downward pressure on it, the square head of the bolt where it drops down in the square hole will prevent it from spinning. And I run that side up just until it touches, and then I'll swap to the other side and run this side down. Just finalize snugging them up, and we're good to go. We'll then do the back set the same way. All right, now that we've got that installed, the only remaining component here is our lower portion of our SumoSpring. We just want to slide it forward or backward as necessary to line it up with the upper portion. And then we'll go in the side here and snug down that bolt that's on bottom. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll stick my wrench up in here on the bolt, and then I'll actually twist the spring to get it snugged, and then you can just kind of finalize it with your wrench there a little bit. All right, got it snugged down. It's not going anywhere. We're lined up. We'll do the exact same procedures that we did here on the passenger side over on the driver's side to get the other side installed. And at that point, our installation is done. Just make sure you lower your vehicle back down before taking it for a test drive. And that completes our installation of SumoSprings on the front axle of our 2015 Winnebago Vista.